Good evening. Welcome to the Town of North Andover's Finance Committee meeting on Monday, June 7th, 2021. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the North Andover Finance Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at northandoverma.gov. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so on their televisions by tuning to Comcast Channel 99 or Verizon Channel 28 or online at northandovercam.org. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of North Andover website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. It is now 7:03 p.m. and I call this meeting to order. I will begin with a roll call, please. Chris Allen.
Here.
Ed McMillan.
Here.
Thomas Ringler.
Here.
Donovan O'Connell.
Here.
Jennifer Les.
Here.
Regina Keene.
Here.
Justin Silk.
Here.
And for the record, Kevin Foley will not be able to attend tonight. All right, I would ask that you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is public comment. Just going to check to make sure we didn't receive any additional public comment. We did not. I will now ask Tim Shearhart, who's been invited to the call to share his public comment. Tim, after that, we will have a response, and then we'll disconnect you from the call. Okay.
Hi, Tim.
If you could.
283 Campbell Road, here in North Andover. Going through the warrant as well as much of the budget and some eye-catching things and trying to put together the entire puzzle relative to COVID and how it's impacted the budgets, in particular the school budget. And what caught my attention was Article 25, I believe, which allows for a transfer of free cash for fiscal year 21 for both school and health. And then in addition, the next article, again, I may have in reverse order, authorizes a transfer of roughly 2.7 million, of which 2.6 million is associated with needs, COVID needs relative to the school. There's a lot of money here. And what I haven't seen in the record so far is a complete accountability, and maybe this is a question really for Melissa, that how much has been spent on COVID by which departments? How much is really forecasted? I mean, there's $2.6 million possible FY22 COVID expenses, of which $1 million is recovery services, which I don't know what all that means. But it also says in here that fiscal 21 expenses were 4.8. So the accountability that I was looking for is how much was COVID, how much of the budgets, in particular the school budget, that we had planned for fiscal year 21 was not spent as planned, but was spent instead on COVID-related expenses. The potential example might be we did deferred hiring school teachers in FY21 that was planned. I believe it was 11 full-time equivalent that was planned. And how does it all add up? And how much in particular did we receive from state and federal relative to paying for all of our COVID expenses. I almost look at the COVID expenses as like a supplemental budget, an unfortunate one that is there, but it doesn't have the same visibility that our standard budget, standard budget has. So I don't know if anyone can answer that question about how it all comes together. Again, I look at the school getting, spending I believe maybe it was more than this, $4.8 million last year, fiscal 21. How much of that was recovered by federal and state? How much of that was spent by using planned or budgeted FY21 school budget? How much was, and then is the rest of it being paid for by the free cash transfer that's planned for fiscal year 21? And then it really rolls all into FY22 as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. I think that we've touched on pieces of that throughout our meeting, so I'll let Melissa answer comprehensively.
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. And I do have lots of backup, Tim, that I'm happy to send to you if it's more helpful, but I'll just quickly run through kind of the big target items. I will say we're still not 100% sure that we're going to need the article at town meeting. If you remember correctly, when we did the MOU, we anticipated that we may need free cash because CARES Act funding ended on December 31st. And we had planned to spend that before the December 31st deadline. So we may be able to, using the $1.5 million Finance Committee reserve, and because snow and ice was so low this year, we may be able to absorb a lot of that through those transfers. I should know more about that by tomorrow. We're trying to get everybody to close out, so it may end up being moot anyway, but it's a great conversation to have. So for CARES Act funding, the total CARES Act funding that the town received was $2.75 million. In fiscal year 20, the school spent $68,961 of that money. Of that, $37,690 was for personnel salaries, and $31,000 was for expenses. And I can share with you basically what the expenses were, but the majority of them were cleaning supplies and PPE, particularly in fiscal year 20. You'll see a lot of wiping products, hygiene, Conlon products, etc. We were buying all the PPE we could find at that point. In fiscal year 20 for the CARES Act funding, the town spent $18,440 in salaries, and then we spent the remainder of that on supplies, and that was about $81,000 on the town side. Again, the majority of that actually was PPE or getting ready to do online bill pay. We did some online upgrades so that people would be able to more accurately do their accounting while we were closed. In fiscal year 21, the school spent $2,086,077.23 out of the COVID CARES Act funding, and the town spent $309,806.03 from the COVID's CARES Act funding. And again, I can go through kind of how we spent that, but we also received FEMA money, so we have those accountings as well. And so I have an accounting of how much was spent in salaries and how much was spent on supplies in both of those years that I'm happy to share with you. And additionally, in fiscal year 20, in fiscal year 21, we were able to have $203,456 in FEMA reimbursements. So FEMA only reimbursed public safety natured items, so it's a lot of backfilling of overtime. We had people who were on a COVID quarantine related to work, or actually when we had a positive COVID case within the buildings, they let us use FEMA to do a deep clean after those cases when we were back in the building. So that's the CARES Act funding, and I'm happy, like I said, I'm happy to put these online or get them to Sasha and she can add them to the packet so anyone can see them. And then after December 31st, we had a whole new bucket of money that we spent. So for the municipal, for after December 31st, we had $75,000 in salaries that we paid, and a lot of that was either public health nurses or to do contact tracing, or we had an additional part-time public health inspector because obviously we were inspecting restaurants, we were inspecting calls that were coming in, we were doing mask enforcement, etc. So that took up a lot of time. And then we also had $78,000 in expenses, and that was PPE again, and cleaning supplies, and also any expenses that went with having the vaccine clinics. The schools after December 31st spent my dog is mad, about oh, he's really mad, $807,955 in salaries and $1 million in expenses. And so I will can be quiet in a minute, but I am happy to have Sasha download all these forms. They're right from Munis and also from Lynn's tracking for the CARES Act funding. The CARES Act funding was very expensive in the filing, as expensive as FEMA is. They audited several of the accounts kind of randomly. One of them was a lot of work for a $400 cleaning bill, but we do have all of that, and I'm happy to share it.
Thank you. I'd like to have that information. Just curious. Hey, I'm retired. I have nothing better to do.
Thank you, Tim.
Of the $53 million in the school budget, that was roughly $53 million for fiscal year 21, how much of that particular part of that bucket was spent on COVID that was not reimbursed by any third party?
At the end of the day, I believe it's going to end up being about $900,000. So as we're doing our final assessments for the end of the year, one of the things that we're doing is taking an analysis of the deficits that exist due to COVID. We were able to separate all of our spending into particular COVID accounts, which is why it was so easy for me to pull these numbers for you, and also makes it more transparent. So we had a COVID, basically like an accounts number that we use for anything that was COVID related. And at the end of the day, I believe they're going to end up having about $900,000 that they're absorbing into the school side of the budget. And we may have an additional $200,000 that we'll be absorbing either into the town side of the budget through things that we didn't fill during the year because we were kind of thinking this might happen, or through the Finance Committee reserve account, which we'll be doing a transfer from.
Okay. One last question.
Thank you.
One last question, please. Actually, I forgot it. So anyways, thank you very much, Melissa.
No problem.
And I
Feel free
appreciate
to reach out to me, Tim. I'm always happy to help.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We'll definitely put that. Thank you so much, Tim, for coming, a former chair and finance committee member. So we appreciate it. And we'll make sure to put that in this meeting's document packet so that you have access to it.
Thank you very much. And with that, I miss you all, and I appreciate the time and effort. So take care, guys. You've had a busy year. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move to the next item on our agenda. We're just going to discuss any potential kind of fiscal impacts of, there is a warrant article that is a proposed development moratorium in town. And I thought it would be prudent to bring Melissa to discuss any potential financial only impacts to our community from the article. So that I think is important for us to understand as we move forward towards town meeting.
Thanks, Sasha. If it's okay with you, I'm just going to present my screen.
Please.
Okay, so can you see that? All good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I have a few slides that I pulled out that I thought would be helpful for the Finance Committee. So as you may or may not know, there is a housing moratorium that is a citizen petition that is pending at town meeting. It would put a pause on any development over a 3-family that would be coming before the town for the next 2 years. And what they're asking for is to not allow any of that development, and also to perform a number of studies, most of which have already been completed. So, all right, hold on. If you don't mind holding on 1 second, I'm going to make him leave. I'll be right back.
No problem.
Sorry, he's 15 and very grumpy. So forgive my dog. All right, so one of the things I just wanted to run through quickly is what the impact of the moratorium would be. So it would stop any new market rate development of 3 families or more. It would not stop any affordable housing developments under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40B. It would not stop any commercial growth, including hotels, retail, or restaurants. Although if you read some of the information that's out there about moratoriums generally, it tends to make a community look not friendly to development. So it could end up actually impacting development in the commercial nature as well. The warrant article does not appropriate any funds for the study, so there is not a funding source to do any of the work that's proposed. And it does impact small projects. So for instance, right now there's a 3-family residential adaptive reuse conversion that's recently been approved by the ZBA, and the planning board is still pending approval by the Concom and Historic District, and that project would not be able to go forward. And so it really is impacting even some of the smaller things that we're seeing in town. So today I'm here to talk to you about the financials. As you know, we build our budget under the constraints of Proposition 2.5. The tax levy, as you all very well know, can increase by 2.5% each year plus new growth. And new growth basically is any new construction that's coming on in the fiscal year. And we do, as I described when I do the financial forecasting meeting, we do a pretty full analysis of what our new construction would look like. We typically estimate about $650,000 in new growth, and that is really based on single-family homes. It can be a new subdivision, or it could be improvements to single-family homes, redevelopment, but that number really is mostly based on that new growth of single-family homes. Any new growth beyond that number is really seen to be extraordinary, and that's typically comprised of the multifamily or the commercial. And just to give you an idea, so in 2016, new growth was 630, 615. In 2017, new growth was actually 570, 773. In 18, it was 867. In 19, it was 1.1. In 20, it was 1.3. And in 21, it was 969. So we've had a couple of good years because we've been seeing kind of some more commercial growth than we typically would see. And additionally, we've had some larger, like Princeton properties, rentals come on, and that has helped our new growth over the years. So if we are using the $650,000 number plus Proposition 2.5, that means our budget can increase by approximately 3.2%. And as you know, a budget increase of 3.2% would result in a level of service budget for the school department. So, and as we also know, the schools have been forecasting increased needs over the next 7 years. So one of the dangers of having new growth stagnant at that $650,000 number is that any of the tax impact of Facilities Master Plan 2, of the operating needs that go along with opening a new building would fall squarely on our current taxpayers, and that's difficult. One thing that I do want to note is that I don't think this would be an immediate impact. So it's not like we would pass the moratorium on June 15th and the fiscal year that we would see the impact would be fiscal year 22. I actually think it would be more like 2 years out from that. Because if you think about it, when we have a large new project come on, like Avalon, or like Princeton Properties, they're in the process for quite a while. And when a housing moratorium is pending, you're not going to see a new project come and start getting into that pipeline. So things are coming on the line right now that have been pending for years. But I think what we'll really see the impact would be in a 2 to 3 year period. Finally, one of the other concerns is that studies are expensive. And again, there is no funding source. So these are all the studies that we actually have completed in the last few years. So we have the master plan, which is currently in its implementation period, the Merrimack Valley Priority Goal Strategy, the school capacity study, which we just did, the open space and recreation plan. We're finalizing now the lake watershed plan. Our housing production plan is valid through 2022. We just finished doing the municipal vulnerability preparedness grant. We're starting a water and sewer capacity study, and I'll tell you that that study alone, the quote I have right now is $80,000, and it's by a consultant who is doing the watershed plan, so they already have a lot of the data. Fiscal impact analysis for several of the recent projects that we've had, and Facilities Master Plan 1 and 2. And the last thing that I just wanted to tell you about that I think is fiscally relevant to the warrant article is that North Andover is one of 78 communities that have achieved the Housing Choice designation. And we actually have to apply for that designation every year. To keep that designation, we have to produce a certain rate or amount of new housing within a 5-year period, and we have to have adopted best practices related to housing production. Any community, so one of the 78, that has this designation actually has exclusive access to capital grants. We can get up to $250,000 a year, and we receive bonus points in other state grant programs. So this year we've been very successful in getting grants, but grants like MassDOT, MassWorks, park grants, complete streets, land conservation, and on and on and on, all give us bonus points because we're a housing choice community. Communities with an active moratorium are not eligible to be a housing choice community, which translates to a potential loss of at least $500,000 in revenue over the next 2 years. And I'm happy to try my best to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Melissa, for that presentation. I'll leave it to the committee to ask any questions that they may have to start.
This is Regina. I have a question about the impact to the senior center, given the fact that the site work for that is shared with the housing development that would go behind. And I guess I'm not sure if it's been permitted yet. So I guess the question is, if that's on pause as well, then the site work for the senior center would be on pause, I would assume.
So we got a legal opinion from KP Law that any project that had already gone through site plan and had a recorded site plan permit would not be impacted by the moratorium. The senior center, the Pitmingo developer has been apprehensive to go forward at risk because, you know, anything could happen at town meeting, as we all know. So as of yet, we have not granted any permits to them, and we have been unable to close while the moratorium is pending. We are trying to get this done this week, actually, but there's a lot of risk involved, and they're apprehensive.
So if it's not closed, then, and this passes, we would be.
Based on the legal opinion that we got from KP, they would be able to get their permits because they have planning board approval already.
Oh, okay.
Can I follow up on that? Just as a clarification, but you're saying that the builder is feeling apprehensive about this. So there is a possibility that the brakes might be put on because the builder is like, I'm not dealing with a town with a moratorium, or I don't want to go forward this because of my fears about a moratorium. Is that accurate?
Yes, and the builder's bank is apprehensive because they have financed the project. So that really has been.
So the financial backing for the builder is actually expressing concerns about the moratorium.
Yes.
That's even more, okay, thank you. That's pretty good clarification. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas.
Are there any potential legal actions? Since some developer might have already spent some money, got some commitment, and things get pulled. Could that be a possibility?
So whenever you have a zoning article that is approved by town meeting, that article has to be approved by the Attorney General as to form. So this article would have to go before the Attorney General, and it would have to be determined whether or not the language is proper. If you read the legal opinion, there is a lot of concerns about the language in the article. And so I don't know what the Attorney General will end up doing. As far as developers, I mean, could there be a reliance argument that they relied on the fact that they had their planning board permit and thought they'd be able to get their building permits? Maybe. But at this point, I think that anybody who had a planning board permit is really actively trying to get their building permits right now. Unfortunately, what happens is that they have to go through a 30-day review, because what we do basically is when you bring your plans in, you have a third-party review for 30 days. So everyone's hustling to try to get that done, but there's no guarantees that we would have that done by June 15th, unfortunately. And the legal opinion is on our website for anybody who wants to read it.
Melissa, this is
Jen.
Jen Luss. I have a question for you. In looking at this petition, I'm reading it, and the studies that they want to do strikes me as being significant overlap with some of what the planning board already does anytime that they're presented with a proposal or a site plan review for bigger projects. And it also strikes me from my time on the planning board as having significant overlap with some of the studies you mentioned, which is the master plan, which took years and years of work and studies. Do you see any benefit to any of the way that this is drafted and the additional studies that they're saying of things that maybe we as a town haven't captured yet? Like, is there any, because I read it and I feel like almost every one of these ticks back to something that the town is already actively thinking about or has thought about recently. And I'm just wondering if there's anything I'm missing, or if there's anything we could take from this if it doesn't pass about things that we could be doing better.
I think the community's done a very good job of doing studies, but also implementing them, which is not something you always see, right? And so if you think about it right now, we have the Master Plan Implementation Committee who's really in the infancy of their work. They've made 2 recommendations so far. They've reviewed the moratorium and determined that it had negative consequences as far as the master plan goes. The only study that I think that we have not completed and that I think would be a good idea for the town to complete is the water utility study. And so we do know, right, that we have a pretty significant water source and it's a treasure for the community. We want to make sure that we have enough water for everyone. So that's one thing that I think would help us in the study, but we've already have agreed to do that. We've given our word to the planning board that we would move that forward. And so we've begun that study as well. So in my opinion, we have already studied all of it. You know, I have additional slides that I didn't bring to you, but they talk about the housing production plan, that talks about the affordability gap in town, that talks about the master plan and all of the different outcomes and proposals and plans that it makes. And we're just getting started on doing that work.
Thank you. Yeah, that was my expectation and my recollection as well. And I mean, it also strikes me as from my time on the planning board that this actually, I mean, this is probably more planning board than finance committee related, but it strikes me as the possibility of putting a moratorium on these types of buildings actually increases the likelihood of us losing a say as a town over what type of development goes into town, because the state could force us to have additional sort of low income housing. And I know there's a certain number in letter or whatever that was a 40B, but that strikes me as problematic, because that from a finance perspective, you lose the opportunity to capture maybe some of the fees and get it designed and sort of structured the way you'd want it to be.
I think you're right. I mean, I've heard a real commitment from the community to get to 10% on 40B, and I think that there's 2 ways to do that. And one is a very systematic and planned way. And you find sites and you work with a developer and you put more dense housing where it fits the best, right? Where traffic will be the best and where public safety will be best suited. And so it makes sense to try to do that and to have a friendly 40B through a LIP, or rather than have it be a more hostile case, which I've seen in the past. So I do think that's the case. Remember, we're not at our 10%. When they did the census numbers in 2010, we were at 8.7. But based on the estimates we have right now, we're probably around 7.5%. And so, you know, we would at least be open to 1. One of the good things about being able to work with the developer is that if you have a project that comes forward that's a 40B combined with a retail aspect, or combined with office space, or combined with market rate, you can do a development agreement. And so you can offset some of the burdens that come from the other parts of the development, which is beneficial to the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I just also wanted to ask, some of the things that we generally have been hearing are, you know, there are other expenses associated with additional development. And I just want to, we're talking about finance. We talked about the impacts to revenue. Is there any expense impacts that are not project specific, right? Because this isn't a project specific conversation that happens at the planning board level. This is an overarching kind of conversation. Is there anything that we're missing from an expense side that we should be talking about? I don't know that it's necessarily applicable, because you can't forecast that necessarily, but is there anything that comes to mind?
We do a fiscal impact analysis for every one of the larger developments that come forward, or at least I do. So we've done one for the ones that have been most recent, and we peer review those as well. We also just completed a school capacity study, which I think is really helpful. In this instance, it's super helpful when we're trying to do facilities master plan too, but it's nice for planning purposes as well. And so I think those are the kind of the 2 major tools that we use when we think about the finances. You know, we have new residents. It does affect our departments, right? But a lot of the time when you have a new construction, you also have revenue that comes in that offsets those costs. And that's why the system is set up the way that it does. And so we do analyze all of those with the larger new projects that come in. I can't think of any that we would be missing or that would be unforeseen based on any of the developments we've seen. They've all been pretty straightforward.
Thank you. And you briefly mentioned the school impact. We had asked as a committee, Greg, the superintendent and assistant superintendent, for an enrollment schedule. And you guys, if the committee recalls, I believe enrollment has stayed pretty steady over the last 10 years, even with additional development. Is that?
Yeah. So actually I have it from 2017. In 2017, we had 4,766 students. In 2018, we had 4,806. In 2019, we had 4,667. And in 2021, we had 4,510. So we have seen decreased enrollment over the last 5 years.
Wow. Okay.
Birth rates, the school capacity study is very interesting. If you're a municipal nerd like me, it would be great bedtime reading, but it's interesting. It talks about birth rates. It talks about the moving in factor. It talks about what we see from different types of housing. Less likely to see children coming out of apartments, more likely to see more children coming out of subdivisions. Subdivisions, if you have a large house, 3,600 square feet, with 4 kids in it, you're actually more likely to be upside down on that than you are on an apartment when it comes to school age children spending. So,
is it possible, Melissa, if you don't mind, if you have that handy to ask to forward our way, and we'll have Jillian put that also in our meeting packet. I think I would really like to dig into that more. I know if we as a committee have never looked at it, but I think it's relevant from an expense standpoint. That's not project specific. It'd be nice to get our hands around that a bit too.
Yeah. And if you ever wanted to learn just more about how the impacts work, we, the fiscal impact analysis consultant that we use, Judy Barrett, we actually have her on retainer to help us with projects. So if you ever wanted to chew her brain, I'm sure she'd be happy to attend.
That would be great. Any additional questions for anyone for the town manager? Thomas, you're on mute.
Melissa, do you know of any other towns that had a moratorium of, that kind of for developments in the last couple of years in Massachusetts?
So Saugus had a housing moratorium. A lot of communities did a marijuana zoning moratorium. I'm assuming we probably did here as well. So a lot of the time when new legislation passed, for instance, when the medicinal and recreational marijuana came out, towns were getting ready to zone that and no zoning was completed yet. So the Attorney General allowed a zoning moratorium for those because you have to be planning. So the way a moratorium works is that it's allowed for a short duration and you have to have a planning study tied to the zoning moratorium. So, and you can only have the length of time it takes you to actually do that planning study. They're very strict about what they allow with housing moratoriums.
Is there like a, what's the impact for Saugus?
So Saugus actually put it on themselves. My understanding is that they worked with the Attorney General's office to find language that would work. The environment is a little bit different now than it was when Saugus did it. This was about maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Since then, the governor has passed his housing choice legislation. And my understanding is at the state level that housing moratoriums are very much frowned on.
So we would be unique with if that happens at town meeting.
Yes.
I feel like Dedham did one a couple years ago as well. They on themselves, like you just described. Saugus did, Melissa, and if I'm not mistaken, didn't Ipswich have one at their special town meeting last year that did not pass?
So Dedham imposed a moratorium on new mixed use development.
Okay,
that's interesting. Let's see. Really interesting that they would do mixed use because that's really what everybody's trying to get, right? Because
I think it's I think their planning board was overwhelmed and they didn't have a master plan or anything like that, so they were just sort of up the creek without a paddle in terms of planning.
I can't tell if Ipswich passed or not.
I thought it didn't. I thought it did not.
Oh, rejects. Yep. So they rejected it.
But Thomas, to your point, it would be unusual.
Did I hear correctly that you said you could only have a housing moratorium for as long as it takes to complete the studies?
That's supposed to be what the rule is. That basically it's the moratorium is supposed to be short in duration and really only for the amount of time that it takes you to complete the study. So if you remember when we did the marijuana one, right, we probably did it for a year because we knew we would write the zoning in that year-long period and have it at the next town meeting. It's not supposed to be a true pause in development the way that I often hear it framed. What it's supposed to be is that you're taking the time to analyze your zoning to see if you need to make zoning changes in order to deal with a problem or a situation.
And if we feel like we've already done a lot of the studies, then, I mean, we're not going to redo them, are we? We're going to produce them and say, okay,
Yes,
here's the study.
correct.
Right.
I mean, I think that what typically happens is that when we turn a zoning article over to the Attorney General, the planning board report goes with it. So they would see that we'd already completed all those studies.
So so you mentioned that there's no, so I don't know if everyone's, you've seen the warrant, but I don't know if you remember. I mean, there's a lot of articles. So just to be really clear, there's no appropriation of funds in that article, which would be required to do those studies, right? Whatever, and there's no specific, I don't recall, is there a specific study requested?
There's a list of studies requested, including fiscal impact of projects, agricultural traffic, but there is no appropriation of an amount or a funding source.
Okay. Which is problematic for us as a finance committee, because if there's no funding source, now this throws our approved operating budget off, right?
Well, I mean, technically, we really would not be able to do any studies because we don't have money to do them. And I can't sign a contract when there's no funds. So we'd have to wait a whole year, basically, to appropriate funds to do a study.
Okay. Okay. Are there any additional questions for the town manager before? So typically, historically, what we have done as a committee is we have not taken a position on a zoning article. So because we are not at planning board meetings, because we don't have experts on zoning that come into our meetings to discuss them, that's typically how we operate. However, in the past, if an article is large enough and has a potential fiscal impact that we deem significant enough to have an opinion about, we will sometimes write a statement that will be read by the chair at town meeting. For example, marijuana, we don't, let me be clear because I may have misspoke. We don't take a position, right? We don't say we recommend this or we don't. We say if this passes, here is the potential fiscal impact as we see it. Is that something that the committee would like to move forward with as it relates to this article?
Yes, I mean, I don't we first need to determine whether we're all on the same page?
Yeah, well, yes, but it doesn't matter what we personally think, right? So you may support the moratorium, you may not, but ultimately, if there's no appropriation of funds, there's no appropriation of funds.
Okay, so
if there's no, you know what I mean?
I do. I thought you're so we'd just really be giving a statement that would say that there's no appropriation of funds and therefore the studies couldn't happen for a year as most. Okay, that's fine. I thought you were.
Yeah. Would we also?
I thought it was on the greater fiscal impact. Yeah. The greater potential fiscal impact is what I was thought you meant, which is why I thought we should all be on the same page. But that's fine.
And we can have an open and we can have an open conversation about it. We've never typically been a committee that is, kind of does a round robin of opinions, although we can do that. I feel kind of like the Brady Bunch because I'm seeing you all in squares.
Well, and I wasn't suggesting that, Sasha. I wasn't. I just wanted to understand.
No, but it's a good suggestion. I mean, let's just talk about it. So what does everyone think? There is an impact, right? So we have no appropriation of funds, that's impactful. Or, someone makes a motion to appropriate funds and take them away from something else in the budget. That could happen too, right? So there's a concern potentially. There's also a concern that we may lose out on grant funding. That's a huge concern. These are fiscal impacts that are concerning to me. And I would, please jump in and.
Well, I think it's not we may lose grant funding. If it's passed, we will lose grant funding. I mean, that's for sure. And it's a significant amount of money. I mean, the minimum is $500,000. It could be far greater than that because there was a whole list of grants in there. It's not nothing. So the fiscal impact I think is significant. And the other thing about the studies is if we have to wait a year before there's a study in place because we haven't appropriated funds, does that mean 1 year of the moratorium has already passed, or does that mean the moratorium doesn't begin until we fund the studies?
That's a Melissa question. I don't know the answer.
No, the moratorium would be effective immediately.
So it just seems like it's really hard to see how this functions without these financial pieces. Wow. But yes, Sasha, I really think that we should have a statement. I mean, at least on those 3 points that our town manager has brought forward of the very obvious fiscal ramifications and perhaps the lesser end if we get lucky, and the more significant end if things truly go south. I mean, I'm talking about grants or how much it would cost to perform a study. I think a cost analysis with that list of studies, how much would each one of those lists cost, might be a good idea. So we could actually put that out. This is the cost. Where is this money coming from? Where do we take it from? Which department? Who pays for this? That's a pretty significant impact. That's not nothing. And
that's a great idea.
What was the third one? Those two. There was one other.
Well, new growth would be
new growth. Right. Exactly. New growth. And that's another really significant impact. I mean, putting dollar figures to each one of those things,
huge.
1, 2, and 3, it's huge. And then bundle them all together and say, this is the financial impact. I don't know, $3 to $5 million over this period of time. It's not, I mean, this is a lot considering how much money we're trying to bring in for our schools. So I think the statement is important.
And I'm happy to, you're right. I think we need to quantify that for the public, right? That's kind of our role, and say, adding these three things, never mind the non-tangible things that we can't quantify at this point, like what signal does this send to the people we want to attract to our community to bolster economic growth, right? What message does it send? And then over the short, like kind of midterm, how does that impact us? Do we, I can't quantify that at this point. I'm sure there are people out there that maybe could, but
yeah, I think it's going to be difficult to put actual real life numbers on these things, right? Because and Melissa, please correct me if I'm wrong, even Chris, your point about missing the grants, we're not guaranteed to lose $500,000. It's probable, right? It's probable, but we could still win some of those grants, Melissa, even with the scoring mechanism the way it is. I mean, we could potentially still win those, right?
So the $500,000 is there's a special grant for capital that's open only to the Housing Choice.
Oh, right. Okay. Yep.
So I think it would be safe to say we could lose the up to, or at least, and then the other ones, we may still get them. We'd be competing against other communities that are Housing Choice communities, and we'd get less points.
Yep.
Is the purpose behind the moratorium that people like the quaint character of the town and they feel that there's a way to stop the growth so it stays this wonderful low key? Is that what they're trying to accomplish to this? Because this doesn't seem like it really does that. It may cause some delays for a year or two, but it's not a solution. It's not like it's a new law that throw. It really just delays it at a cost, right? It makes us do all these studies Am I understanding this correctly? That's probably the intention, right?
Right. The only real legal ramifications that it has is that no development can move forward for a 2-year period. After that, June 16th, 2023, we'd be right back to where we are unless the zoning change came forward. But you can't do a zoning change not allowing multifamily. If anything, because we're an MBTA community, we're going to have to change our zoning to increase the availability for multifamily.
Right. Yeah, no, I didn't really pay attention to that issue. It's a very enlightened discussion. I guess it's not our position to do this. I think we just comment on the fiscal side of it, but it might, it seems like a lot of work for a relatively small benefit. That's just my opinion. If there's even the benefit you're paying for.
Melissa, do you mind just clarifying pretty quickly? You mentioned an MBTA community. In case anyone's watching or for other members of the finance committee, could you just quickly touch on that for a minute or so?
Sure. So, like I said earlier, the governor has passed new legislation this year. It's housing choice legislation. And one aspect of that legislation says that within, I think it's like a 2-year period, any community that receives MBTA funding, which we do, has to have a zoning change basically to allow for vibrant multifamily.
I'm sorry, Ed, do you mind muting? Thank you. Go ahead, Melissa. Apologies.
No, you're good. So that's something that we'll be having to do over the next 2 years. So I don't know how much of you got, but before the governor passed a new legislation that requires any communities that receive MBTA funding to create housing in zoning, multifamily housing within their zoning if they don't already have it. And so that's something that we're going to have to be looking at so that we can comply with that zoning because we are an MBTA community.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'll circle back with the committee. So, how would you like to move forward? I'm happy to draft something, and then we can take a vote on whether or not it gets read. We have a meeting right before town meeting. We can do that, and I'm happy to send it out in advance. Obviously, we cannot discuss it via email because of open meeting law, but I can certainly share it and we can post it to the meeting so that it's publicly available as well. And then we can decide whether or not we would like to we would like to read that, and it would kind of encompass the things that we discussed today. Melissa, should I take a vote on that, or how do you?
I would, or at least understand the sentiment of the committee. You certainly wouldn't want to do all that work and then have there not be agreement.
All right, so do you want me to is it a formal vote? I'm just to gauge sentiment.
You can. I mean, if you're going to do it formal, I would say to authorize the chair to move forward with drafting a report for town meeting regarding the moratorium.
Do you guys want some more discussion on this before someone makes that motion? All right, hearing none, I will take a motion if there is one.
Yeah, go for it, Regina.
It's Regina Keene. I will move that we authorize the chair, Sasha Weinrich, to document a statement to be read at town meeting that articulates the financial implications of a housing moratorium, such that we discussed tonight.
Thank you, Regina. Do I have a second?
I will second. Donovan O'Connell.
Thank you, Donovan. And I will take a roll call vote. Ed McMillan?
Yes.
Dustin Silk?
Yes.
Regina Keene?
Yes.
Jennifer Luz?
Yes.
Donovan O'Connell?
Yes.
Thomas Ringler?
Yes.
Christine Allen?
Yes.
And I also vote in the affirmative. The motion is passed. Thank you, everyone. So what I'll do is I will draft that. I will circulate that. Please do not reply all so that we don't violate any open meeting laws. And then we can discuss it at our meeting right before town meeting when we open up the meeting, if there is anything to discuss. And then we will we'll read that as we historically have before the town votes on that article. All right. Great. Thank you, Melissa. I really appreciate it. We're going to just move on to old business. Thank you so much for the time.
I'm going to go feed my dog, but I appreciate all your support and your help. So thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks. I don't have any old business. I kept this on the agenda in case there's anything before town meeting that we wanted to circle back on. I will allow any member to bring up any old business as needed if they'd like to discuss anything. Okay. Actually, we have not voted on the article that appropriates free cash to the schools. So we are going to vote on that at the meeting prior to town meeting. I just want to let everyone know that I have also asked for additional information from the superintendent and assistant superintendent regarding sources and uses of funds on what has been spent and what they plan to spend, a little bit more specifically than we saw in the presentation. I don't know that we necessarily need that for our vote, but I think it is prudent for the Finance Committee to have that information so that we understand more clearly how the funding sources of the school works. I think we focus a lot on the municipal side, and we should also focus on the school side in order to better understand and in the future hopefully support the schools in their initiatives. So I wanted to let everyone know that I've requested some additional information, and I will make sure that the committee is privy to that and it's in our meeting documents once we have it. Okay. Any questions? All right. Let's move on to our minutes from last meeting. They're the minutes of May 25th.
Sasha, it's Regina. I had a couple of comments on the minutes.
Please.
On page 2, the third line down, it says, Ms. Weinrich asked if there will be a need to use free cash after receiving the 2.6 million. Is that correct? I feel like you would have asked, will they need the use of free cash after receiving like the 9 million from the new money that we to be getting?
Or I would have asked, do they need to use it if they use federal funds first? Right.
Yes, exactly.
So,
something. It just didn't seem like that would have been what you asked. I couldn't remember because I didn't go back
no.
to the meeting.
So why don't I ask? So that was one, and then
Okay,
is there another?
Yes. The second point was the following the next. So there's a sentence in the following sentence after that, 2 sentences later, where it says Ms. Weinrich asked about the consultant's role. I feel like you were talking about the consultant's role in the school building projects. So it kind of totally shifts focus from the free cash discussion to the school building projects. And that's just not clear at all if you're reading this like as an outsider. And I just think we should say, topic switch to school building, projects, or asked about the consultant's role in the school building projects or something, because otherwise I don't think anybody would really understand what that's talking about.
Okay, noted. And I think that potentially we should wait to approve these minutes till our next meeting. And what we'll do is we'll ask Jillian, because she's going to listen to this meeting, to do these minutes. So she just heard your comments. We'll ask her to please amend those, and then we can approve them at our next meeting.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. I think that we are ready to adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So Regina Keen, I move to adjourn the meeting.
Do I have a second?
Chris Allen, second.
All right. I will take a roll call vote. Ed McMillan.
Yes.
Justin Silk.
Yes.
Regina Keen.
Yes.
Jennifer Lev.
Yes.
Donovan O'Connell.
Yes.
Thomas Ringler.
Yes. Though I still have a question
Chris
about the
out.
logistics at town meeting for us.
I do too.
Okay. All right.
We can
So
pause.
let's not adjourn the, let's pause and then we'll what is your question, Thomas?
So when are we going to meet and where are we going to meet? This is always, sometimes I feel like 10 minutes before the meeting, I don't know if we meet and where we meet.
Yeah, so that's to be determined because they're still figuring out the logistics of an outdoor meeting. So it's we have to figure out what rooms are available to us and if we're allowed to meet indoors or if we have to kind of pick a spot outdoors. And it may also be weather dependent. So I don't know the answer, but as soon as I have it, I'll make sure to be incredibly clear in an email to you. And also you can text me anytime.
All right.
Is that all right? But there will be no Chinese food. Apologies. Second year in a row.
What is it? Italian?
Regina, what?
Nothing.
But Regina?
No, that's good.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna start over for the sake of procedurally.
You can just take my yes.
Do I have?
I move
Chris?
to adjourn the meeting again. This is Regina.
Do I have a second?
Yes, second.
Okay. Ed,
Yes.
Dustin,
Yes.
Regina,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Donovan.
I don't know. I'm thinking about maybe voting no now, but yes, yes.
Thomas
Yes.
and Chris.
Yes.
And the meeting is adjourned and we'll probably never be virtually again. So I will see you all next week.